Chaos feels familiar, doesn't it? The constant noise, the endless to-do lists, the way life seems to throw one curveball after another. It's exhausting, but in a strange way, it's also comfortable. Because chaos gives us something to blame. It's the reason we haven't started that project, the excuse for why we're stuck, the scapegoat for our unmet dreams. But what if the real terror isn't the chaos at all? What if the thing that keeps us up at night isn't the mess, but the moment it clears, the terrifying silence of clarity? Seneca, the Stoic philosopher, saw this paradox centuries ago. He wrote about how we cling to distraction, how we'd rather drown in busyness than face the stillness of our own minds. Because in that stillness, there's no one left to blame but ourselves, no more hiding behind the noise, just the raw, unfiltered truth of who we are and what we're capable of, or worse, what we've been avoiding. Think about the last time you had a moment of real clarity. Maybe it was a sudden insight about your career, a relationship, or a habit you've been ignoring. That split second when everything made sense, did it feel like relief? Or did it send a jolt of fear through you? Clarity demands action. It strips away the illusion that you're just a victim of circumstance and forces you to confront the fact that you're the one holding the reins. And that's terrifying because now there's no excuse left, no more, "I'll start when things settle down," no more, "I'd succeed if only," just you and the undeniable truth of what you need to do next. This is why so many of us subconsciously choose chaos. It's safer. It's easier to blame the storm than to admit we've been standing still. But here's the Stoic twist: clarity isn't your enemy. It's the gateway to freedom. The anxiety you feel when the fog lifts, that's not a sign you're on the wrong path. It's proof you're finally facing the right one. Stoicism teaches us that the discomfort of clarity is where growth begins. It's the moment you stop waiting for permission and start taking responsibility. In this video, we're going to unravel why clarity scares us more than chaos ever could, and how the ancient wisdom of Stoicism gives us the tools to not just endure it, but embrace it. Because the life you want isn't hiding in the chaos, it's waiting on the other side of the fear, and the only way out is through. Why do we cling to chaos like a security blanket? Because deep down, we mistake the whirlwind of busyness for control. The Stoics saw this illusion clearly, especially Epictetus, who drew a line between what we can influence and what we can't. When we're drowning in chaos, it feels like we're steering the ship, even if we're just reacting to waves. But here's the irony: chaos doesn't give us control. It gives us an alibi, a reason to say, "I couldn't possibly focus on what matters, look how much is happening." Meanwhile, clarity strips that excuse away. It shows us the truth: the only thing we truly control is our next move. Marcus Aurelius put it bluntly: you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. That's the heart of it. Chaos lets us pretend the outside world is calling the shots, but clarity forces us to admit we've been avoiding the one thing we can change: ourselves. Take career indecision, for example. How many people stay stuck in unfulfilling jobs, telling themselves they're waiting for the right opportunity, while secretly fearing they might not measure up if they actually pursued it? The chaos of job hunting, networking, or endlessly researching options becomes a shield against the vulnerability of commitment. So where does this show up in your life? Maybe it's the cluttered calendar that leaves no room for deep work, or the back-to-back distractions that keep you from having that hard conversation. Chaos thrives in the gap between knowing what to do and daring to do it. But here's the Stoic challenge: stop confusing motion with progress. A stormy sea isn't a sign you're sailing, it's a sign you're resisting the helm. The moment you stop blaming the waves is the moment you start navigating. There's a particular kind of paralysis that comes with clarity, the moment you realize you can't unsee what you finally understood. Picture this: you've spent months, maybe years, telling yourself you'll switch careers, leave a draining relationship, or finally prioritize your health just as soon as the timing feels right. But when the noise fades and the path forward becomes obvious, something unexpected happens. Instead of relief, you freeze, because now there's no more someday. No more hiding behind "I'm still figuring it out." Just the stark reality of a choice that's yours to make. This isn't indecision, it's the fear of commitment masquerading as caution. The Stoics saw this pattern long before modern psychology gave it a name. Seneca called it postponing life. In his letters, he wrote about how we treat our deepest commitments like distant destinations, always over the horizon. We tell ourselves we'll act when conditions are perfect, when we feel ready, when the risk disappears. But here's the truth he uncovered: those conditions never come. Waiting for certainty isn't wisdom, it's avoidance disguised as patience. Because commitment isn't about having all the answers. It's about choosing a direction and refining it as you go. The virtue isn't in being flawless, it's in showing up despite the fear of falling short. Chaos loves this hesitation. It whispers that keeping your options open is freedom, that indecision keeps you safe. But what if the opposite is true? Epictetus nailed it when he said, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." Clarity doesn't demand perfection, it demands courage. The courage to pick a path knowing you might course correct later. The courage to admit that not deciding is still a decision, one that often costs more than the wrong choice ever could. Think about the opportunities that slipped by while you waited for a sign, the relationships that faded because you wouldn't choose, the growth that stalled because you wanted a guarantee before taking the first step. So where does this show up for you? Maybe it's the business idea you've researched to death but never launched, or the difficult conversation you keep rescheduling. It could even be something as simple as a hobby you're too intimidated to try because you might not excel immediately. That's the irony of our avoidance. We think we're dodging failure, but we're actually practicing it in advance. Every day we delay, we reinforce the habit of hesitation. The Stoic remedy: treat commitment like a muscle. Start small. Choose one thing you've been putting off, not because you're sure it's flawless, but because it's aligned with who you want to become. The goal isn't to eliminate doubt, it's to act alongside it. Here's the twist: clarity doesn't promise smooth sailing. It just hands you the oars, and that's where real freedom begins, not in the illusion of infinite options, but in the power to steer. So let me ask you this: what's one decision you've been postponing, not because you lack information, but because you've been waiting for the fear to leave first? Because here's the secret the Stoics knew: the fear won't leave, but you can learn to move with it. We check our phones an average of 96 times a day. That's once every 10 minutes, a relentless pull toward distraction we've come to accept as normal. But here's what those numbers don't show: how often we reach for that screen not out of necessity, but because we're fleeing from something quieter and far more unsettling: our own thoughts. Ancient Rome had its distractions too: gladiator games, chariot races, the endless gossip of the forum. Marcus Aurelius saw through it all when he wrote, "Nowhere can a person find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in their own soul." He wasn't just praising solitude, he was exposing the uncomfortable truth we still avoid today: busyness isn't productivity, it's anesthesia. Think about the last time you had nothing to do, no notifications, no chores, no background noise. How long did it take before unease crept in? That discomfort isn't boredom. It's the wake-up call chaos has been muffling. The questions we scroll past, am I where I want to be? What am I avoiding? Don't disappear when we ignore them. They just grow louder in the gaps between distractions. The Stoics didn't just tolerate stillness, they weaponized it. Seneca spent evenings in deliberate self-examination, asking himself, what bad habit did you cure today? What fault did you resist? No apps, no busy work, just raw conversation with the one person we're most afraid to confront, ourselves. Modern life swapped chariots for algorithms, but the game remains the same. Social media doesn't just distract us, it convinces us we're being productive. We call endless scrolling research, mistaking activity for progress, but as Marcus Aurelius warned, you could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. That's the power clarity steals back from chaos, the realization that time isn't just passing, it's being spent. Every minute lost to mindless busyness is a minute you could have used to build, heal, or choose differently. So here's the challenge. Steal 10 minutes today. No phone, no to-do lists, no background noise. Sit with the discomfort until it starts to speak. You'll hear two things: the excuses you've been making and the solutions you already know. Because clarity isn't something you find, it's what's left when you stop running. Not knowing feels safer than knowing. There's a strange comfort in the fog of ambiguity. It lets us pretend the hard choices aren't ours to make. Stoicism cuts through this illusion like a knife. Seneca called self-deception the greatest obstacle to wisdom, and it's easy to see why. When we cling to uncertainty, what we're really clinging to is the right to stay passive. Think about the person who avoids a health checkup because they'd rather not face the results. On the surface, it looks like denial, but dig deeper, and it's a calculated trade, temporary peace of mind in exchange for long-term consequences. Ambiguity becomes a shield, and we wield it expertly against ourselves. The Stoics knew this game well. They saw how we dress up avoidance as patience, how we call procrastination waiting for the right moment. But clarity refuses to play along. It strips away the luxury of maybe and replaces it with the weight of must. Here's the paradox: ambiguity feels like freedom, but it's actually a cage. Every time we choose not to know, we surrender agency. We hand the reins to chance and call it fate. Meanwhile, clarity, for all its initial discomfort, hands them back. It says, here's what's true. Now, what will you do about it? That's why the ancients prized honesty above comfort. Not because the truth is always pleasant, but because it's the only ground firm enough to build on. Consider how this plays out in relationships. How many conversations go unspoken because things are fine enough? How many fractures get ignored until they become breaks? Ambiguity lets us off the hook. We tell ourselves we're keeping the peace when really we're just postponing the work peace requires. Clarity, on the other hand, demands courage. It's the difference between saying, I don't know where we stand, and admitting, I've been afraid to ask. One keeps you drifting, the other lets you steer. So here's the question Seneca would ask: what truth are you avoiding? Not the abstract philosophical kind, the concrete one staring back at you in quiet moments. The career move you've been calling a backup plan, the habit you've been downplaying as not that bad, the conversation you keep rescheduling because it's easier to assume than to know. Clarity doesn't judge these choices, it just removes the veil, and that's the gift beneath the fear. Once you see clearly, you can't unsee, but you also can't stay stuck. Because the same truth that scares you is the one that sets you free. Barry Schwartz called it the paradox of choice, the idea that more options don't lead to more freedom, but to paralysis. We think clarity means seeing every possible path, but the Stoics knew better. True clarity isn't about having all the answers laid out before you. It's about recognizing which questions actually matter. Epictetus put it bluntly, if you wish to improve, be content to appear clueless or stupid in extraneous matters. That's the heart of it. Clarity doesn't just reveal options, it forces you to confront the fact that most of them are noise. Take modern dating, for example. Swiping through endless profiles feels like freedom, so many possibilities, so little commitment. But how often does that abundance actually lead to deeper connection? More often, it becomes a way to avoid the vulnerability of choosing. We tell ourselves we're keeping our options open, when really, we're just postponing the work of building something real. The Stoic approach flips this script. Instead of asking, what if I miss out, it asks, what's worth committing to, because clarity isn't about finding the perfect path. It's about having the courage to walk one. This applies to everything from careers to daily habits. Ever spent hours researching the best productivity system, only to realize you've wasted the time you could have spent actually working? That's the paradox in action. More choices don't make us more effective, they make us more anxious. The Stoic remedy is radical simplicity. Identify what aligns with your deepest values and let that lens filter out the rest. Marcus Aurelius didn't wake up wondering how to optimize his morning routine. He asked, what is it in myself that I must improve today? The question wasn't open-ended. It was pointed, personal, and designed to cut through distraction. Here's a challenge: grab a pen and list 3 values that define who you want to be. Not vague ideals like success or happiness, but concrete guideposts: integrity, curiosity, resilience. Then, the next time you're drowning in options, ask which choice reflects these. You'll find most decisions make themselves, because clarity isn't about having no doubts. It's about having a compass, and the wild thing, the more you use it, the lighter the burden of choice becomes. What feels like limitation at first reveals itself as liberation. The chaos of infinite options fades, and what's left is the quiet confidence of knowing not that you chose perfectly, but that you chose purposefully. That's the Stoic secret Schwartz missed. Freedom isn't found in keeping every door open. It's found in closing the ones that lead away from the life you're trying to build. So the next time you're paralyzed by possibilities, remember the goal isn't to eliminate doubt. It's to act despite it, because the alternative isn't freedom. It's a lifetime spent standing in the hallway, afraid to turn the knob. Brené Brown once said that vulnerability is the birthplace of love, belonging, joy, courage, and creativity. But here's the catch: it's also the birthplace of fear, because to be vulnerable is to stand in the stark light of clarity, where every imperfection is visible. The Stoics understood this tension centuries earlier. They didn't call it vulnerability, they called it courage. The courage to look at yourself without flinching, to speak your truth without armor, and to act with integrity even when it's easier to hide. Marcus Aurelius put it plainly: waste no more time arguing what a good person should be one. That's the raw demand of clarity. It doesn't just ask you to see the truth. It asks you to live it. Think about the last time you hesitated to give honest feedback, maybe to a coworker, a friend, or even yourself. Was it really kindness holding you back, or was it the fear of being seen as harsh, or worse, being wrong? Clarity strips away the comfortable vagueness of maybe and sort of. It forces you to show your cards. This isn't working. I disagree. I need help. There's no safety in those words, just the terrifying freedom of being fully known. That's why we default to half-truths and polite fictions. They're not just social lubricants, they're shields. But here's what the Stoics knew. Integrity isn't about being flawless. It's about being aligned. When you stop masking your true thoughts, you stop spending energy on the performance of who you think you should be. Consider the artist who hides their work until it's perfect, or the leader who nods along in meetings while screaming dissent inside. The chaos of pretending is exhausting. Clarity cuts through it with a single question. What if you stopped performing and started showing up? So where are you masking your true thoughts? Is it in the lukewarm compliments you give instead of real praise? The hesitant "I'm fine" when you're drowning? The polished social media posts that edit out the messy middle. Every time you choose the mask over honesty, you trade short-term comfort for long-term dissonance. The Stoic alternative isn't brutal honesty, it's radical responsibility. Not, "This is who I am, take it or leave it," but "This is where I stand, and I'm willing to grow from here." That's the paradox Brown and the Stoics both uncover. Vulnerability isn't weakness, it's the ultimate act of self-possession. To say, "I don't know," "I was wrong," or "This matters to me," is to reclaim agency over your narrative. The chaos of people-pleasing and posturing will always feel safer in the moment, but clarity, though it scares us, is the only path to the relationships, work, and self-respect that don't require a performance to sustain. The choice isn't between comfort and courage, it's between hiding and living, and the bridge between them is the willingness to be seen. Good vibes only. You've seen the hashtag, the mugs, the Instagram posts that treat discomfort like a glitch in the system. It's a modern mantra, this idea that we can curate our lives like playlists, skipping the tracks we don't like. But here's the problem, life isn't a playlist. It's a full album, every messy, dissonant note included. The Stoics knew this better than anyone. Their concept of amor fati, the love of fate, wasn't about slapping a smile on suffering. It was about staring reality in the face and saying, "This too is part of the story." Seneca put it bluntly, "Fate leads the willing and drags the unwilling." You don't have to like what happens to you, but refusing to accept it, that's where the real suffering begins. Take grief as an example. Modern culture treats sadness like a bug to be fixed. They're in a better place. Stay strong. Everything happens for a reason. These aren't comforts, they're escape routes. Toxic positivity doesn't heal pain. It just shoves it into the shadows where it grows heavier. Contrast that with the Stoic approach. When Marcus Aurelius lost his children, he didn't pretend it was fine. He wrote, "Accept the things to which fate binds you, not as resignation but as recognition. This hurt is real and it's yours to carry." Clarity here isn't about finding silver linings. It's about admitting the clouds exist. So ask yourself, what emotion are you suppressing under the guise of staying positive? Anger, envy, fear. We've been taught to treat these as failures, glitches in the system of our best lives. But the Stoics saw them as data. Anger signals a boundary crossed. Envy points to unclaimed desires. Fear highlights what you've left unconfronted. Clarity means listening to these uncomfortable messengers instead of silencing them with platitudes. Because here's the irony, good vibes only doesn't lead to happiness. It leads to exhaustion, the kind that comes from pretending you're a statue when you're actually a storm. The next time you're tempted to dismiss a feeling as negative, pause. Don't judge it, don't fix it, just name it. Say, "This is sadness," or "This is frustration." That simple act of acknowledgement is Stoicism in action. It's the difference between being dragged by fate and walking alongside it, because clarity isn't about seeing only what's bright. It's about seeing everything and choosing to move forward anyway. I'll start when I have more time. I'll begin after I've done more research. I'll take the leap once everything feels aligned. Sound familiar? These aren't just delays, they're illusions. The Stoics saw right through this centuries ago. Epictetus described life as a gatekeeper's test. You don't get to rehearse outside the gates forever. At some point, you have to step through. Yet here we are, treating preparation like progress, mistaking planning for living. The truth, you'll never feel ready. Not because you're inadequate, but because readiness isn't a feeling, it's a decision. Take the creative projects gathering dust in your mind. That novel, that business idea, that skill you've been meaning to learn. How often have you told yourself, I'll dive in when I'm more confident, as if confidence arrives like a package on your doorstep? Marcus Aurelius cut through this fantasy. Begin at once. To act is to begin, not when the stars align, not when fear subsides, now, because action isn't the result of readiness, it's the path to it. Every great endeavor starts clumsy. The first draft is messy, the first attempt falters, but the Stoic secret is this: you refine the work by doing the work, not by waiting for divine permission. Here's where we trip ourselves up. We treat beginnings like grand unveilings when they're really just small, stubborn steps. Think of the athlete who waits for motivation to train, not realizing motivation follows action, not the other way around. Or the entrepreneur who stalls until their plan is perfect, ignoring the fact that every real venture pivots a dozen times before it finds its footing. Epictetus's gate test reveals the irony. The longer you linger outside, the more you convince yourself you're not cut out for what lies beyond. But the gate doesn't judge your readiness. It just asks if you're willing to walk through. So here's the challenge: not tomorrow, not later, but today. Pick one thing you've been postponing. Not the monumental, life-altering move, those are just excuses in disguise, but the simple, doable next step. Research one course instead of figuring out your entire career. Write one paragraph instead of outlining the whole book. Send one email instead of waiting for the flawless pitch. Clarity won't come from waiting, it comes from moving, and the moment you take that step, you'll realize something startling. The gate was never locked. You were just holding the handle. I thrive under pressure. We wear it like a badge of honor, don't we? As if the ability to endure chaos proves our worth. But here's the uncomfortable truth. When we define ourselves by how well we survive the storm, we forget to ask what we're surviving for. The Stoics saw this trap clearly. Seneca warned, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more that is poor." Replace more with more chaos, and the lesson hits home. We mistake the adrenaline of crisis for purpose, the weight of busyness for meaning. But virtue, true strength, isn't measured by how much you endure. It's measured by what you choose to build in the quiet. Take burnout culture. We romanticize late nights and overflowing inboxes, calling it dedication. But strip away the drama, and what's left, often just fear. Fear of facing the quieter question, who am I when I'm not putting out fires? Chaos becomes an identity because it's easier than answering that. It's easier to say, I'm swamped, than I'm uncertain. Easier to blame the whirlwind than admit we've been using it as camouflage. Seneca praised the quiet life not because it was passive, but because it demanded something harder: honesty. In stillness, you can't hide behind the noise. You're left with only what you've cultivated: your values, your choices, your unmasked self. So here's the challenge: imagine your life without the chaos. Not as a blank slate, but as a deliberate space. Who would you be if you weren't defined by what you withstand? The Stoic answer isn't about doing less, it's about owning more. More responsibility for your time, more intention behind your yeses and nos, more courage to define yourself by what you create, not what you survive. Because pressure doesn't forge character, clarity does, and the first step is realizing you've been wearing the storm like a crown, when it was really just a weight you learned to carry. Memento mori, the Stoic practice of remembering death, isn't about morbidity. It's about the sharpest form of clarity there is. Picture this: you're handed a terminal diagnosis. Suddenly, the meetings you stressed over, the grudges you nursed, the trivial anxieties that kept you up at night, they all dissolve. What's left? Only what truly matters. That's the power of mortality as a mirror. It doesn't just show you that life is short, it shows you what's worth spending it on. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You could leave life right now." Let that determine what you do and say and think, not as a threat but as a lens. When you live as if today could be your last, you stop tolerating what doesn't serve you. You stop postponing what does. Think about the last time you faced a near miss, a car swerving too close, a health scare, a close call that left your heart racing. Remember how everything snapped into focus. The petty argument with your partner suddenly seemed absurd. The project you'd been procrastinating felt urgent. That's memento mori in action. It's not death that terrifies us, it's the realization that we've been living on autopilot. The Stoics didn't use mortality to scare themselves into despair. They used it to scare themselves awake. Here's the paradox: we avoid thinking about death because it feels dark, yet that avoidance keeps us in the shadows. We fill our days with busy work, mistaking motion for meaning because it's easier than asking the real question. If this were my last year, would I still be doing this? The answer isn't always to quit your job or sell your possessions. Sometimes it's simpler. Maybe you'd call your parents more. Maybe you'd finally write that letter. Maybe you'd sit quietly instead of filling the silence with noise. Mortality doesn't demand grand gestures, just honest ones. Consider how differently we approach time when it's scarce. A traveler with one day in a city doesn't waste hours scrolling reviews. They pick a street and start walking. A patient with limited time doesn't fret over minor slights. They savor moments they once overlooked. That's the gift memento mori offers, not a life of constant solemnity, but one of deliberate presence. The meeting you're dreading, it's a privilege if you imagine not being here to attend it. The mundane chore, an act of love if you frame it as caring for a life you get to keep living. So here's the challenge: borrow the clarity of the dying. Not in a morbid way, but with the urgency of someone who knows the clock is ticking. Ask yourself, what would I stop tolerating today if I knew my time was limited? What would I start? The answers aren't always comfortable, but they're always illuminating. Because when death becomes the teacher, every trivial worry gets an F. And what's left? Only the work and the love. That's worth your precious finite days. Decision fatigue isn't just exhaustion, it's the slow drain of 1,000 tiny choices. From the moment we wake up, we're bombarded. What to wear, what to eat, which email to answer first, which task deserves our limited focus. By noon, our willpower feels like a phone battery at 10%, and we haven't even touched the hard stuff yet. The Stoics anticipated this modern plague centuries ago with a practice called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. But don't let the name fool you. This isn't about expecting disaster, it's about cutting through the noise before it starts. Epictetus put it plainly: the chief task in life is simply this, to identify and separate matters so that I can say clearly to myself which are externals not under my control and which have to do with the choices I actually control. In other words, conserve your mental energy for what matters. Think of it like a capsule wardrobe. Someone who spends 30 minutes each morning debating outfits isn't just wasting time, they're depleting the focus they'll need for creative work or tough conversations later. Now scale that up. Every unnecessary choice, what to stream, what to order, which app to check, adds friction to your day. The Stoic solution: defaults. Routines, deliberate constraints that free you from decision quicksand. Marcus Aurelius didn't wake up wondering how to structure his morning. He followed a ritual journaling, reflection, exercise, so his mind stayed fresh for the challenges only he could face. Here's where modern life gets it backward. We equate endless options with freedom, but the Stoics knew better. True freedom isn't about keeping all doors open. It's about choosing which ones to close so you can walk through the ones that matter. Consider Steve Jobs' iconic black turtleneck or Einstein's identical suits. These weren't quirks, they were strategic simplifications. Every choice they didn't make preserved mental bandwidth for the work that defined them. So where can you reclaim this clarity? Start small. Pick one daily decision that feels trivial but adds up. What to eat for breakfast, which route to take to work, when to check email, and turn it into a ritual. Not because routines are rigid, but because they're liberating. When you automate the mundane, you protect your capacity for the extraordinary. The goal isn't to eliminate choice. It's to spend it where it counts, because willpower isn't infinite. But with a little Stoic foresight, it doesn't have to be. There's a particular kind of unease that creeps in when you realize you've been climbing the wrong ladder. It's not the sharp sting of failure. It's the dull ache of dissonance, the slow dawning that the life you're living doesn't match the life you value. The Stoics called this oikeiosis, the natural pull toward harmony with your true nature. Seneca described it as a form of self-betrayal when we ignore it. The greatest obstacle to living is expectancy, which hangs upon tomorrow and loses today. You are arranging what lies in fortune's control and abandoning what lies in yours. In other words, the anxiety isn't just about what you're doing. It's about who you're becoming in the process. Take the lawyer who excels in court but dreads Sundays because Monday looms like a threat. Or the artist who trades their sketchbook for a spreadsheet, telling themselves it's temporary, until years pass and the compromise hardens into identity. These aren't just career choices, they're fractures in alignment where external success masks internal drift. The Stoics saw this as a violation of nature itself. Just as a tree grows toward light or water seeks its level, humans thrive when their actions reflect their deepest convictions. Ignore that pull, and even achievement feels hollow. But here's where it gets tricky. Alignment isn't about perfection, it's about direction. The musician who teaches to pay rent isn't betraying their craft unless they stop playing altogether. The parent who pauses a dream for their child's needs isn't failing unless they forget to unpause. The pain comes not from compromise, but from forgetting what you're compromising for. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Ask yourself at every moment, is this necessary?" Not as a critique of hard work, but as a litmus test for meaning. Is this sacrifice moving you toward something true, or just numbing the discomfort of admitting you're off course? So where does your life feel out of sync? Maybe it's the friendships that drain more than they give, or the routine that leaves you exhausted but not fulfilled. It could even be something as simple as the hobbies you've abandoned because they didn't fit the image you're trying to uphold. The Stoic remedy starts with one brutal question: what am I pretending not to know? Because alignment isn't found in grand gestures. It's in the small, honest admissions, the moment you stop justifying and start choosing. The anxiety you feel isn't a flaw. It's a compass, and the longer you ignore it, the louder it gets. Seneca warned that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. But sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop imagining and start confronting what's already real. Why clarity feels like falling behind is one of modern life's cruelest ironies. The moment you start seeing your path clearly, social media floods your screen with someone else's highlight reel: promotions, vacations, milestones, all perfectly timed to make your progress feel inadequate. The Stoics called this envy's trap. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "What is it to you if someone else is richer, more famous, or more successful? These things don't define your virtue." He wasn't dismissing ambition, he was exposing the distraction of comparison. When we measure our clarity against someone else's chaos, or worse, their curated illusion of order, we trade our peace for a race we were never meant to run. Take LinkedIn, where every scroll feels like walking into a room where everyone's announcing raises and accolades while you're still figuring out your next step. That knot in your stomach isn't just envy, it's clarity hijacked. You started the day knowing exactly what you needed to do, but now your to-do list feels trivial compared to someone else's grand achievements. Here's what the Stoics understood. Envy isn't about the other person. It's about the story you're telling yourself, that you're behind, that you've wasted time, that your path should look like theirs. But as Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, no two things are identical, not even the hairs on your head. Your journey isn't a copy, it's an original. The real danger isn't comparison itself, it's how it dilutes your focus. Every minute spent agonizing over someone else's progress is a minute stolen from your own. Seneca described envy as admiration's shadow, a distortion of what could inspire you into what paralyzes you. Think about the last time you saw a peer's success and felt that pang. Did it motivate you, or did it send you spiraling into self-doubt? Clarity requires guarding your attention like a sacred resource, because the world will always dangle someone else's achievements in front of you, but your power lies in choosing where to look. Here's the challenge: try a 24-hour social media fast, not as a detox, but as a clarity experiment. Notice what happens when you stop measuring your reality against curated illusions. The first few hours might feel like withdrawal, your thumb reflexively reaching for the app, your mind craving the dopamine hit of comparison. But by hour 12, something shifts. The noise fades and your own priorities start speaking up again. That project you've been postponing, the conversation you've been avoiding, they weren't drowned out by chaos. They were buried under the weight of everyone else's stories. The Stoics didn't have Instagram, but they knew the human mind's tendency to borrow trouble. Epictetus advised, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it." In other words, stop consuming ideals and start living yours, because clarity isn't found in the endless scroll. It's found in the courage to close the app and face the only question that matters. What will you do with your one wild, imperfect, irreplaceable path? The most unsettling sound in the world isn't a scream or a siren, it's silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the heavy quiet of an unoccupied hour when there's nothing left to distract you from your own thoughts. We'll binge podcasts on the commute, queue up another episode while doing dishes, even scroll mindlessly in elevator rides too short to matter anything to avoid the void. But here's what the Stoics knew: that very silence we dread is where wisdom whispers loudest. Epictetus put it bluntly, "No man is free who is not master of himself." And how can you master what you won't even face? The noise isn't just background static, it's the leash we willingly clip to our own collars. Consider the modern commute. For most, it's a gauntlet of stimulation, music, news, notifications, all layered like armor against the threat of empty time. But what are we really protecting ourselves from? The clarity that comes when the noise stops, the realization that the career we tolerate is sapping our vitality, or the relationship we've been nursing along has already flatlined. Silence doesn't create these truths, it just removes the gauze we've wrapped around them. The Stoics didn't just tolerate stillness, they revered it. Seneca spent evenings in intentional solitude, calling it the time when I can examine my entire day. Not to judge, but to align, because in silence, the gap between who you are and who you pretend to be becomes impossible to ignore. try this experiment. Take a walk without headphones. No podcasts, no playlists, just the rhythm of your footsteps and the chatter of your own mind. At first, it'll feel unbearable, like standing naked in a crowded room. You'll itch to reach for your phone, to drown out the awkwardness with input, but stay with it. Notice how your brain, starved of external noise, starts digging up buried concerns, the apology you've been putting off, the creative project gathering dust, the nagging sense that you're spending your days on autopilot. This isn't anxiety, it's clarity knocking, and the Stoic secret is this: what feels like discomfort is actually your mind rerouting to its natural state, like a river finding its bed after a dam breaks. The ancient philosophers practiced hesychia, the discipline of stillness, not as escapism but as radical honesty. Imagine your mind as a snow globe. Constant shaking keeps everything swirling, blurred. Only when you set it down can the sediment settle and the landscape become clear. Modern life keeps us shaking that globe relentlessly, mistaking motion for vitality. But Epictetus warned, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth so we can listen twice as much as we speak. He might as well have said, so we can hear ourselves think. Because the answers we chase are often already there, buried under layers of borrowed noise, so tonight steal 10 minutes of pure silence, not meditation with its focus on breath, not journaling with its structure, just you, a quiet room, and whatever rises to the surface. It might be uncomfortable, it might even hurt, but here's the paradox the Stoics uncovered. The silence that terrifies you is the same one that will set you free. Because clarity isn't found in the next podcast, the next scroll, the next hit of distraction. It's waiting in the space between them, the space you've been taught to fear, but were born to inhabit. Why indifference feels scary is one of Stoicism's greatest paradoxes. We mistake detachment for apathy, as if stepping back from emotional turbulence means losing our humanity. But the Stoics called this apatheia, not the absence of feeling, but the freedom from being ruled by it. Seneca put it bluntly, you suffer more in imagination than in reality. He wasn't advocating numbness, he was offering a lifeline, the chance to observe your emotions without being drowned by them. Think about the last time you felt consumed by anger or anxiety. It wasn't the emotion itself that exhausted you, it was the way it hijacked your thoughts, your actions, even your breath. Apatheia is the antidote, not by silencing the storm, but by learning to stand in the eye of it. Picture a sailor who panics at every wave versus one who knows how to adjust the sails. Both feel the wind, only one is controlled by it. Here's where we trip up. We worry that if we don't react intensely, we don't care deeply. The parent who fears that stoic calm means loving their child less. The activist who equates detachment with complacency. But Seneca challenged this. Does the surgeon weep while cutting, or the general mourn while strategizing? Passion isn't measured by turbulence, it's measured by what you build in spite of it. So ask yourself, what emotion controls you? Is it the fear of disapproval that keeps you from setting boundaries? The need for validation that fuels endless hustle. Even positive emotions can become cages, like the joy of praise that makes you dependent on external approval. Apatheia isn't about feeling less. It's about reclaiming the space between stimulus and response, where your choices live. The irony, what feels like losing emotion is actually gaining agency. The artist who stops fearing criticism creates more boldly. The leader who isn't addicted to applause leads more authentically. Detachment isn't a wall. It's a window, one that lets you see clearly enough to act wisely, even when your heart races, because the goal isn't to stop feeling, it's to start choosing. Ignorance might feel like bliss in the moment, but the Stoics saw it as a form of theft, stealing from your own potential. Marcus Aurelius wrote, what injures the hive injures the bee. He wasn't just talking about community, he was exposing the lie that we can separate our well-being from the world around us. Clarity isn't just a personal advantage, it's a responsibility. When you see clearly, you can't unsee, and with that vision comes the duty to act. Think of the leader who avoids bad news to preserve their peace of mind. Short-term comfort, long-term collapse. Stoicism flips this script. True peace isn't found in avoidance, but in the courage to face what's true and respond with integrity. Take the modern temptation to unplug entirely, to mute the news, ignore the inbox, and retreat into a curated bubble of positivity. On the surface, it feels like self-care. But dig deeper, and it's often just fear in disguise. Fear of overwhelm, fear of helplessness, fear of realizing how much needs to change. The Stoic approach isn't to drown in the noise, but to filter it with purpose. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire in turmoil, yet his meditations reveal a man who refused to look away. You've slept enough, he reminded himself. Time to live as someone awake. Awake not to everything, but to what matters, the injustices you can address, the relationships you can mend, the work that aligns with your values. Here's the paradox: clarity doesn't demand that you fix the world overnight. It asks only that you stop pretending it isn't broken. When Seneca advised his friend Lucilius to withdraw into yourself as far as you can, he wasn't endorsing escapism. He was prescribing focus, the kind that lets you discern where your energy will actually land. The activist who burns out trying to solve every problem helps no one. The neighbor who listens deeply to one struggling friend changes everything. Duty isn't about scale, it's about sincerity. So this week, choose one informed action. Not a grand gesture, but a deliberate step. Read the article you've been avoiding, not to despair, but to understand. Have the conversation you've been postponing, not to fix, but to witness. Clarity is a gift, but only if you use it, and the Stoic secret: the weight of seeing is lighter than the weight of pretending not to. Why good enough terrifies us is one of modern life's quiet paradoxes. We chase perfection like it's the finish line, when really it's the prison. The Stoics saw this trap centuries ago. Epictetus warned, "No great thing is created suddenly." Yet here we are, treating every attempt like it must be masterpiece or bust. That half-written novel in your drawer, the abandoned language app, the certification course you keep retaking because you might miss something, these aren't signs of dedication. They're proof we've confused excellence with paralysis. Consider the endless course taker, always learning, never doing. They'll devour every book on writing but never publish, master every photography technique but never share their work. Why? Because as long as they're preparing, they're safe. Safe from criticism, safe from failure, safe from the terrifying moment when good enough leaves the dock and sails into open water. The Stoics called this the cowardice of potential. It's easier to worship the god of what could be than to kneel at the altar of what is. Here's where Stoic wisdom flips the script. Progress isn't the enemy of perfection, it's the antidote. Marcus Aurelius didn't wait to become the ideal emperor before ruling. He ruled his way toward becoming one, that unfinished project collecting dust on your hard drive. It's not a failure, it's a fingerprint proof you showed up when perfection didn't. The musician who performs imperfectly grows faster than the one who never leaves the practice room. The writer who publishes flawed essays hones their voice quicker than the one waiting for divine inspiration. So here's the challenge. Think of one thing you've been putting off because it's not ready. Not the monumental life project, but the small, doable next step. Share the draft, launch the beta version, have the conversation without rehearsing every possible outcome. Epictetus wasn't suggesting we abandon standards, he was reminding us that virtue is built brick by brick, not unveiled as a finished monument. The chaos of perfectionism isn't rigor. It's just fear dressed in a tuxedo, pretending to be classy when really it's just scared to dance. Why boundaries feel like loss is one of modern life's cruelest illusions. We treat limits as deprivation, as if every no is a door slammed shut rather than a window open to what truly matters. The Stoics saw this deception clearly. Seneca wrote, "Life is long if you know how to use it," exposing the truth we avoid. Time isn't just passing, it's being spent. Every unnecessary yes isn't generosity, it's a withdrawal from your finite account of days. Take the classic overcommitter, the one who says yes to every request, every favor, every quick coffee that turns into an unpaid consulting session. They mistake busyness for worth, fearing that boundaries will make them seem selfish or unkind. But here's what the Stoics understood: integrity isn't measured by how much you give away. It's measured by what you refuse to compromise. When Marcus Aurelius said, "Waste no more time arguing what a good person should be one," he wasn't advocating self-sacrifice. He was demanding discernment, because a yes to everything is a no to the few things that actually align with your purpose. Think about your own life. What obligation drains you not because it's hard, but because it's hollow? The committee meeting where your presence changes nothing. The side project that stopped inspiring you months ago. Even the friendships that feel more like performances than connections. These aren't commitments, they're leaks, and each one drips away the energy you could pour into what Seneca called your chief task: living in agreement with nature. That doesn't mean rejecting all demands, it means auditing them. Is this yes moving you toward your best self, or just propping up an image of who you think you should be? Here's the paradox: what feels like losing opportunities is actually reclaiming agency. The entrepreneur who stops taking every client gains space to serve the right ones deeply. The parent who guards family dinners from encroaching work emails isn't being rigid, they're choosing presence over performance. Even small boundaries act like trellises, giving your best efforts something to climb rather than spilling aimlessly onto the ground. So ask yourself, what's one yes that's costing you more than it gives? Not the hard but meaningful work, the obligation that leaves you emptier than before. Because clarity isn't just about seeing what to pursue, it's about admitting what to release, and the moment you do, you'll realize the truth the Stoics knew: a well-placed no isn't a wall. It's the foundation of every worthwhile yes. We avoid journals the same way we avoid eye contact in an elevator. Something about the blank page feels too revealing. It's not just the fear of confronting our thoughts, it's the terror of seeing them written down, undeniable in black and white. Marcus Aurelius knew this. His private journals, later published as meditations, weren't grand proclamations. They were messy, repetitive, sometimes even contradictory. An emperor's raw dialogue with himself, full of reminders like, "Waste no more time arguing what a good person should be." B1. He wasn't crafting wisdom, he was excavating it from the clutter of his own mind. Consider the modern equivalent, the morning pages ritual, where you're supposed to dump your thoughts onto paper first thing. How many of us abandon it after a week, not because we're too busy, but because it's unnerving to meet our unfiltered selves before coffee? Socrates claimed the unexamined life isn't worth living, but let's be honest, the examined life is exhausting. It's easier to numb out with notifications than to ask, why did I snap at my partner yesterday? Or, what am I really avoiding by working late again? Here's the Stoic twist: journaling isn't about self-judgment, it's about pattern recognition. When Marcus wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events," he wasn't scolding himself. He was mapping his mental terrain, noting where he kept stumbling so he could navigate better next time. Think of it like a ship's log. No captain expects perfect seas, but they damn well record the storms, not to dwell on them, but to learn their rhythms. So tonight, try this one sentence, not a manifesto, not even a full thought, just a single line that captures what you've been dodging. I'm resentful about X. I keep pretending Y doesn't bother me. The goal isn't eloquence, it's excavation, because clarity doesn't demand a dissertation. It just asks you to stop lying to yourself, one small truth at a time. Fear of missing out isn't just anxiety, it's addiction. Addiction to chaos, to novelty, to the relentless chase of whatever's shimmering just out of reach. We scroll through curated highlight reels of other people's lives and call it connection, mistaking the adrenaline of comparison for actual living. The Stoics saw this madness centuries ago. Epictetus called it inner festivals, the illusion that happiness lives somewhere other than where you are. He didn't mean we should never seek joy. He meant we've been duped into thinking joy requires constant stimulation, that a life without spectacle is a life wasted. But here's the truth we avoid. Boredom isn't emptiness. It's the blank canvas where meaning gets painted. Take trend culture, the frantic race to stay current, to know every meme, watch every viral show where what's in before it's out. We tell ourselves we're staying relevant, but dig deeper, and it's just FOMO in disguise, the Stoic alternative, contentment in repetition. Not because variety is bad, but because chasing it relentlessly is exhausting. Marcus Aurelius didn't rule Rome by jumping at every novelty. He ruled by returning daily to the same few principles: justice, temperance, courage. His power wasn't in his adaptability to trends, but in his commitment to core truths. The modern equivalent, the friend who unapologetically rewatches their favorite movie for the 10th time instead of forcing themselves to endure the latest algorithm-recommended blockbuster. There's a quiet rebellion in that, a refusal to let the world dictate what deserves your attention. So here's the challenge: try a boring weekend. No spontaneous trips, no cramming in 7 social events, no frantic scrolling to fill every quiet moment. Just the rhythm of ordinary life, reading that book you've been putting off, cooking a meal slowly, maybe even sitting with the discomfort of your own thoughts. At first, it'll feel like withdrawal. You'll itch to check your phone, to manufacture some drama, to prove you're living, but stay with it. Notice how the pressure to perform starts to lift. How the silence, once terrifying, becomes spacious. The Stoics didn't glorify monotony, they revered intentionality. The difference between a rut and a ritual isn't the action, it's the awareness you bring to it. Epictetus asked, "Why should I envy someone else's festival when I can host my own?" He wasn't talking about literal parties. He meant the inner celebration of sufficiency, the realization that you don't need external spectacle to feel alive. The entrepreneur who stops chasing every industry conference and instead dives deep into their craft. The parent who trades weekend extravaganzas for lazy board game afternoons. These aren't compromises, they're revolutions, because when you stop equating excitement with value, you reclaim something precious, the right to define what matters. The chaos of FOMO will always scream for your attention, but the real question isn't what you're missing, it's what you're building by staying put. There's a reason we swipe our cards with such ease when life feels uncertain. Every purchase whispers the same seductive lie: this will fill the gap. Retail therapy isn't just a habit, it's a numbing ritual. We trade money for momentary relief, as if accumulating things could silence the deeper question gnawing at us: what if I don't have enough? The Stoics saw this panic centuries ago. Seneca called it imaginary poverty. the delusion that wealth lies outside us, in the next purchase, the next promotion, the next milestone. He wrote, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more that is poor. That craving isn't just for objects, it's for certainty. For proof that we're safe, that we matter, that we won't run out. Consider the clearance rack as emotional triage. You didn't need those shoes, but buying them dulled the anxiety of a job review looming next week. The subscription boxes piling up unopened aren't about the products, they're about the thrill of arrival, the fleeting high of something new to distract from the stagnation you feel in your career." Even the minimalist scrolling through luxury home tours isn't admiring decor, they're rehearsing a fantasy where a perfectly styled space finally makes them feel settled. The irony, the more we spend to outrun uncertainty, the more we reinforce the very scarcity we fear. Here's the Stoic refrain: wealth isn't a number. It's a mindset. When Musonius Rufus taught that the wealthiest person is the one content with least, he wasn't glorifying poverty, he was exposing the freedom in enoughness. Picture two versions of yourself, one frantically upgrading gadgets to feel relevant, the other sitting quietly in a modest room, utterly unshaken by ads screaming new and improved. Which one radiates abundance? The answer reveals the trap. We think clarity comes from external security, but real security comes from internal clarity. So ask yourself, what scarcity are you actually avoiding? Not the mythical, not enough money, but the deeper lacks: time, purpose, connection, rest. The credit card bill might show dinner charges, but the hunger it's trying to feed is often loneliness. The cluttered closet isn't a storage problem, it's a self-worth problem, the belief that you'll finally become someone when you own the right things. The Stoic antidote isn't austerity, it's discernment. Before your next purchase, pause, not to judge but to inquire: am I buying this to solve a practical need or to silence an emotional one? Because clarity isn't found in the next transaction. It's found in the space between wanting and choosing, where you remember you were already whole. Your phone buzzes another notification, another demand for your attention. But here's the uncomfortable truth: most of those alerts aren't urgent. They're manufactured emergencies designed to hook you back into the endless scroll. The Stoics had a term for this 2,000 years before smartphones existed: ta aphorma, the distractions that pull us from what matters. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If you seek tranquility, do less." Not nothing, just less of what doesn't serve you. He wasn't advocating laziness, he was prescribing precision. Because every time you react to a notification, you're not just answering a ping, you're surrendering a piece of your focus, your agency, your life. Think about your email habits. How often do you check your inbox not because you need to, but because you've been conditioned to? That reflexive reach for your phone isn't productivity. It's a nervous tick, a way to fill the silence with the illusion of control. The average person checks email 15 times a day, 15 interruptions, 15 fractures in your concentration. Now multiply that by social media alerts, news updates, and messaging apps. The math is staggering. We're not just distracted, we're being dismantled, one notification at a time. Digital minimalism isn't about rejecting technology. It's about reclaiming sovereignty over your attention. Picture your mind as a garden. Every unnecessary notification is a weed, stealing nutrients from the plants you're trying to cultivate: your work, your relationships, your peace. The Stoic approach: prune relentlessly. Seneca practiced this by regularly examining his habits and cutting away what drained him without giving value in return. He didn't call it digital detox, he called it wisdom. Here's the challenge: delete one app today, not the one you use mindlessly, that's too easy. Delete the one you think you need but secretly dread. The news app that fuels your anxiety without informing you. The social platform where you scroll more than you connect. Don't overthink it, just remove it. Notice what happens in the empty space it leaves behind. At first, there'll be phantom limb syndrome, your thumb reaching for what's no longer there, but soon something else emerges. Room. Room to think, to breathe, to remember that your attention isn't a commodity to be sold to the highest bidder. It's the currency of your life. Spend it like Marcus Aurelius would, on purpose. Rage feels like fire, wild, uncontrollable, consuming. We slam doors, scream into pillows, white-knuckle the steering wheel, mistaking this chaos for catharsis. But the Stoics saw through the illusion. Anger isn't strength, it's surrender. Seneca called it brief madness, a temporary eclipse of reason where we trade our power for the cheap thrill of lashing out. Think about the last time anger hijacked you, the rush, the righteousness, then the hollow aftermath. Like a thunderstorm that leaves nothing but mud, anger often creates more mess than it clears. But here's the Stoic paradox. Anger isn't useless. It's a signal, a flare shot into the dark to show us where our boundaries have been crossed. The difference between road rage and advocacy isn't the intensity of feeling, it's the direction of the energy. One smashes windshields, the other builds shelters. Marcus Aurelius warned, the best revenge is not to be like your enemy. He wasn't preaching passivity. He was revealing the alchemy of anger transformed. When we stop screaming at the world and start changing it. Consider the activist who channels fury into policy reform, or the parent who turns exhaustion from their child's bullying into a school anti-harassment campaign. These aren't people who got over their anger. They're people who refused to let it end with them. Seneca put it bluntly, no tree becomes rooted and sturdy unless many winds assault it. Anger, like wind, can uproot or strengthen depending on what it hits. So ask yourself, what pain fuels your anger? Not the surface irritations, the slow driver, the rude comment, but the deeper wounds. The injustice you've swallowed, the disrespect you've normalized, the dream you've deferred because someone convinced you it was foolish. That's where clarity lives, in the quiet beneath the storm, where anger stops being a weapon and starts being a compass. The Stoics didn't teach suppression, they taught redirection, because fury without purpose is chaos, but anger with vision, that's justice under construction. Heroes intimidate us because they reflect what we fear we'll never measure up to. We scroll through highlight reels of greatness, Marcus Aurelius ruling an empire with wisdom, Seneca writing timeless essays amid political chaos, Epictetus rising from slavery to teach kings, and instead of feeling inspired, we feel small. But here's where we've misunderstood Stoicism entirely. The Stoics didn't worship their role models to feel inadequate. They studied them as blueprints. Epictetus put it plainly, don't envy the man who seems to have it all, become the student of how he got there. That's the shift, from comparison to curiosity, from intimidation to ignition. Take imposter syndrome, that gnawing sense that you're one mistake away from being exposed as a fraud. It thrives on the illusion that everyone else was born with clarity, while you're still fumbling in the dark. But here's what the Stoic heroes reveal. Marcus Aurelius didn't wake up wise. His journals show a man wrestling with temper, fatigue, and doubt, practicing virtue like a skill, not performing it like a natural gift. Seneca didn't pen perfect prose on his first try. His letters reveal drafts, rewrites, and the humility to call himself a lifelong learner. The gap between you and your heroes isn't a flaw. It's the space where growth happens. So here's the challenge. Pick one Stoic life and study it like a map, not a mirror, not to ask, why aren't I there yet? But to trace the steps. How did Epictetus transform his enslavement into freedom of mind? not by denying his pain, but by refining his focus, what's mine to control and what isn't. How did Cato the Younger become synonymous with integrity? Not by being born fearless, but by choosing principle over popularity. So often it became habit. These aren't superhumans, they're case studies in applied courage. The next time you feel dwarfed by someone's legacy, remember, admiration is fuel, not a verdict. The Stoics didn't want your awe, they wanted your action. So read one letter from Seneca today, not as a relic, but as a conversation. Underline the line that stings, the truth that resonates. Then ask the only question that matters. What would this look like if I practiced it, not perfectly, but persistently? Because the goal isn't to become a statue on a pedestal. It's to live like the person who built it, one chisel stroke at a time. Hustle culture screams that more is always better. More hours, more output, more achievements. It's chaos dressed as ambition, a relentless treadmill where the finish line keeps moving. But the Stoics offered a radical alternative, the concept of enough. Marcus Aurelius wrote about the inner citadel, that unshakable core where external metrics lose their power. He wasn't dismissing hard work, he was redefining success as alignment, not accumulation. Picture the overachiever who's burned out by 35-corner office, 6-figure salary, yet utterly empty. They've climbed the ladder, only to realize it was leaning against the wrong wall. The chaos of constant striving didn't bring fulfillment. It just drowned out the quiet voice asking, "What's this all for?" Stoic sufficiency flips the script. It's not about settling, it's about sovereignly declaring what fulfills you, independent of societal noise. Take the entrepreneur who scales back from 80-hour weeks to 40, not out of laziness, but because they've calculated the exact point where extra income no longer translates to extra happiness. Or the artist who stops chasing viral fame and instead cultivates a small, devoted audience. These aren't compromises, they're acts of defiance against a system that profits from your dissatisfaction. Marcus Aurelius' inner citadel isn't a metaphor for withdrawal. It's a fortress of clarity. Imagine standing in a storm, yet remaining dry because you've built walls where they matter. The overachiever's burnout stems from leaving those walls unguarded, letting every external demand, promotions, praise, prestige, dictate their worth, the Stoic alternative. Define your metrics in advance. Enough isn't a number. It's a threshold where your effort aligns with your values, where the scale tips from meaningful to mindless. So here's the challenge. Pick one area: work, relationships, possessions, and define enough for yourself. Not the societal ideal, not your parents' expectations, but the point where more wouldn't add meaning. Just wait. Maybe it's capping your work week at 50 hours because you refuse to miss your kids' bedtime. Maybe it's owning fewer books but actually reading them. The goal isn't minimalism, it's intentionalism, because clarity isn't found in the endless chase. It's found in the courage to stop and recognize you were already whole. Freedom overwhelms precisely because it promises everything but demands nothing. The blank page, the open schedule, the endless possibilities of a life untethered. These are the landscapes where dreams go to die of indecision. The Stoics knew this paradox intimately. Seneca wrote, "To be everywhere is to be nowhere," exposing the lie that boundless choice equals boundless potential. Creativity doesn't flourish in the void, it thrives within fences. A poet given infinite syllables would drown in them, but give her a sonnet's rigid structure, 14 lines, iambic pentameter, and suddenly the constraint becomes the catalyst. The walls aren't a cage, they're the mold that shapes the sculpture. Consider the paralysis of the writer staring at a blank document. The cursor blinks like a metronome counting down to failure. Now imagine that same writer handed a challenge. Tell this story in exactly 100 words. The panic shifts, the mind, freed from the tyranny of anything goes, snaps into focus. Constraints don't limit imagination, they direct it. This is why Hemingway wrote Standing Up, why Dr. Seuss crafted Green Eggs and Ham with just 50 unique words. The Stoic parallel, Epictetus's discipline of ascent, the practice of pausing before impulses, creating space between stimulus and response. The constraint of reflection becomes the birthplace of wisdom. So where in your life could limits set you free? The entrepreneur drowning in ideas might thrive with a rule: no new projects until one is shipped. The overwhelmed parent might reclaim sanity by blocking 2 sacred hours each weekend, not for more productivity, but for unbroken play. Even the Stoics didn't pursue virtue in the abstract. They broke it into daily practices, morning meditations, evening reflections, the deliberate narrowing of attention to what could be controlled. The gift isn't in the constraint itself, but in the clarity it forces. When you can't do everything, you're left with the radical question: what's truly worth doing? Marcus Aurelius framed it as a question of ownership. You own only your mind, everything else is on loan. The artist who embraces constraints isn't admitting defeat, they're declaring sovereignty over the chaos. A river without banks is a flood, but narrow its path and you harness its power. The next time you feel stuck in possibilities, and don't ask for more freedom, ask for the right walls, because sometimes the clearest path forward is the one with guardrails. Clarity can be the loneliest place on earth, not because no one understands you, but because you finally understand yourself. That moment when the fog lifts and you see your life with stark honesty. It's exhilarating and isolating all at once. The Stoics knew this paradox well. They didn't retreat into solitude as hermits. They built circles of accountability, what Marcus Aurelius called fellow soldiers in the camp of virtue. These weren't cheerleaders or yes men. They were truth tellers, the kind of people who'd hold up a mirror to your excuses and say, "Is this who you want to be?" Epictetus put it bluntly: "Tell me who you spend time with and I'll tell you who you are." He wasn't judging, he was exposing the gravitational pull of companionship. Spend your days with people who gossip, and soon you'll measure your worth in whispers. Surround yourself with those who chase status, and you'll start mistaking applause for purpose. But find even one person who values integrity over comfort. That's when growth accelerates. Think of the friend who asks, "Why are you really staying in that job?" instead of nodding along with your complaints, or the mentor who says, "You're capable of more," when everyone else is content with your mediocrity. Superficial friendships thrive on chaos. They're built on shared distractions, venting about bosses, bonding over busyness, filling silence with plans you'll never follow. But Stoic relationships thrive on clarity. They're the ones where silence feels safe, where you can admit, "I'm scared," without being handed platitudes. Picture 2 friends sitting quietly after a failure. One says, "This sucks. What did you learn?" The other says, "Let's get drinks and forget about it." Both are kind, only one is useful. Here's the challenge: initiate one honest conversation this week. Not a monologue, not a performance, but a real exchange. Tell someone you trust, "Here's where I'm stuck," and resist the urge to soften it with jokes or caveats. Watch how the space between you changes when pretenses drop. The Stoics didn't build communities to escape reality, but to face it together, because clarity shared isn't just courage multiplied, it's loneliness dissolved. Chaos is seductive because it lets us play the victim. It gives us endless excuses to stay stuck. But clarity, that's the mirror that shows us our own hands on the wheel. The Stoics didn't just stumble upon this truth. They built tools to face it. Acceptance isn't resignation, it's the act of staring reality in the eye and saying, "This is where I stand." Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the decision that what matters is worth the discomfort. And reflection, that's the daily practice of scrubbing away the illusions we use to numb ourselves. Marcus Aurelius put it plainly, "When you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love." That's the heart of clarity, recognizing that privilege comes with responsibility. Think about the last time you blamed chaos for your stagnation. "I'm too busy to exercise. My schedule is too packed for deep work." Now imagine peeling back that excuse like a label. What's underneath? Often, it's not a lack of time, but a fear of what you'll discover when you finally slow down. The workout you avoid might reveal how much energy you've lost. The project you postpone might force you to confront your self-doubt. Chaos lets us hide from these truths. Clarity drags them into the light, not to shame us, but to show us where we're already capable. Here's the invitation: start small, not with a life overhaul, but with one daily moment of brutal honesty. Maybe it's pausing before you reflexively say, "I'm fine," and admitting, "Actually, I'm overwhelmed," or deleting one app that turns your focus into confetti. Clarity compounds. Each time you choose it over comfort, you reclaim a little more agency. The Stoics knew this wasn't about perfection, it was about practice. So tell me in the comments, what's your chaos comfort? The excuse, the distraction, the busyness you cling to when clarity feels too bright? Because here's the secret: naming it is the first step to loosening its grip. The life you want isn't on the other side of perfection, it's on the other side of that admission, and the only way out is